Hello, everybody, and welcome back to What Does Jesus Teach? Today, we're going to continue in our series of the end times in the book of Revelation. Today, we're going to be talking about Revelation chapter 6, and this will be part 1 of this chapter. All right, so we are coming close to the signs discussed before that must take place before the day the Lord can come. As a review, as we talked about in the earlier videos, we know from scriptures that during Daniel's 70th week, which is a 7-year period in the end times, when the sun and the moon go dark, then the day the Lord can come. We also reviewed that on the day of the Lord, the rescue or rapture comes first, then God's wrath is poured out second. And both take place on the same day, one after the other. So let's take a look at those two scriptures again that talk about that. So we have Joel chapter 2, verse 31. It says, "The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day the Lord comes." Acts 2, 19 and 21 also covers that. I will grant wonders in the sky above and signs in the earth below, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and glorious day the Lord shall come. And it shall be that everyone who calls the name of the Lord shall be saved, or will be saved. So again, so these are the two scriptures that, we already talked about these. I'm not going to go into depth about them, just wanted to reference them before we begin. So we're going to be looking for these things to happen as we continue. All right. So this is the passage that we talked about earlier in the series, and I think the first or second one, if I believe. I'm not going to read the whole thing. This is just more of a review. Daniel 9, 24 to 27, it talks about, the 7-year period in the context of the weeks. And more specifically, that in the middle of the week, what we talked about is most commonly believed the Antichrist or man of lawlessness is going to come in the middle and stop the sacrifice and grain offerings. He's going to cause an abomination that makes desolate. He'll have some destruction. So that happens in the middle. And what you've seen here is also in the visual. I've made a visual that kind of charts out the 7-year period. And then as we start walking through some of the events in chapter 6, we'll start populating that. And I'm just starting with the midpoint there illustrated because we've already talked about that. And again, that's one of those black and white scriptures. Okay, so let's go on. All right. Now, as I go through Revelation 6 and 7, I'm going to be using Matthew 24 as a parallel. The reason is because you can see in the two scriptures noted there, in verse 29 in Matthew 24 and verse 12 and 13 in Revelation 6, it talks about the sun going dark and the moon going red. So because those events are in there, I'm going to use them both, and I'm going to kind of compare them as much as possible side by side, because they are parallel type of scriptures. It's just that one kind of helps fill the gap of the other. So it'll be a little more clear if we kind of look at them both side by side as we continue. So that way, and you can see the similarities for yourself. All right. So in setting the stage, Revelation 6 mostly focuses on what happens as the Lord starts removing the seals. If you remember in Revelation 5, 4 and 5, and it talks about, who can open the seals, and then, the Lord takes the scroll or the book, depending on the translation you're looking at, and he's the one that can be worthy to open it. And he's going to remove the seals before the contents that are in the that are in the scroll or the book can take effect. Now, in general, I would caution anybody to check bias, check assumptions that you may have if this is something you've studied before, and try to catch yourself on any assumptions or presumptions that you may have made based on what you've been taught. For example, as each seal is open, we find events taking place on the earth, but one common assumption is that the removal, the opening, or the breaking of each seal causes events to take place on the earth. However, that is an assumption made when reading the scriptures, because all the scripture tells us is that as each seal is open, John is called to witness events on the earth and events in heaven. In no place is it written that the removal of the seal is the cause of the events. Even though this is a common teaching, it is that as a presumption, but that isn't actually written anywhere. And by the way, we haven't seen the rapture yet. I thought that was worth mentioning it. Again, it kind of goes from the last chapter. But with that said, let's jump in. All right, so we're going to kick it off a little bit with Matthew 24 because it starts before the Revelation 6 portion. And Matthew 24, verse 3, it says, "As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?'" Now, the setting in Matthew 24 is that Jesus and his disciples were passing by the temple. He had already explained about some things that are going to be happening to the temple. So they asked him a question, including that, but also regarding the end of the age and the sign of his return. Now, many people point to the answer to this question and what Jesus is about to cover as the final return of Jesus, like at Armageddon, like at the end of the 7 years when it comes to, fulfill the final part of his wrath. However, if that's something that you believe personally, I would ask you this question. If the return Jesus is about to discuss in Matthew 24 is not about his return for the church, that includes the very same faithful followers who are asking him the question, then why would those faithful followers be interested in knowing when Jesus is coming for people that have nothing to do with the faithful followers of Christ? Why would they have an interest in the return of Jesus that they won't be a part of? So it just means kind of weird if the disciples would, generally speaking, represent the church, are asking him, when are you coming back? It'd be kind of weird to say, when are you going to come back, but not for us? I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing. So again, it just seems like a pointless question. It doesn't disprove it, it's just something to kind of consider. All right, so let's jump in or continue. All right, so Revelation 6, 1 through 2, it says, "Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice of thunder, 'Come.'" Remember, this is John writing. It says, "I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and the crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." Now let's look at Matthew 24. It says, "And Jesus answered and said to them, 'See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many.'" Now, regardless of the doctrine of end times that most people have, one of the things that's typically agreed upon, generally not disputed a lot, is that the person referring to here, the person with the bow, is the Antichrist, the man of lawlessness. Again, I'm not saying everybody absolutely agrees, but this is just a general, whether you believe in pretrib, prewrath, whatever. This is just one of those common beliefs. Now, let me share with you an interpretation that's also very common with that, is that this person, having the bow, is symbolically referring to achieving his goals from a distance. Archers, for example, are from far away setting their attacks, but you can think of them like a sniper. You might not even see them coming. You won't even know who they are because they don't face the enemy. Most people believe that he will be like a political type of figure where he can coordinate his evil without actually revealing himself as the Antichrist. And he will conquer by misleading people everywhere that he is there to do good and to gain followers. Now, in Matthew 24, it references that many are misleading. That would go in line with the work of the Antichrist, as there is no way he could do all the work by himself. He needs help. So he will convince other people to mislead with his message. And make sure I don't miss anything. All right, so let's examine the text. So far, do we see the signs for the day of the Lord to come? No. Do we read anywhere that the events here were caused by God or commanded by God? No. So therefore, we have nothing showing that the day of the Lord has begun. Now, let's continue. Now I'm adding, you see here I'm adding our first addition to the chart. Now note that the arrows are not meant to give like a perfect scale when each event takes place. It's just there as a generality. So I'm not trying to show that some of the 3.5 years begins, like a week or two pass or whatever. Like it's not specific to scale. It's just kind of showing this is the first event that we have. So the arrow could be a little to the left or a little bit to the right. So don't focus so much on the placement of it, only just that it's in the order. What we do know so far is that the abomination of desolation hasn't taken place. It hasn't been mentioned. So we know that so far, whatever's going on is to the left of the middle. All right, let's continue. Revelation 6. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that the men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. Now let's look at Matthew 24. Jesus said, "You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end." Okay, so here we see more of a direct parallel. We have Revelation 6 showing that peace is being taken from the earth, and this horseman has a great sword as opposed to the bow that the Antichrist symbolically has in the first two verses. Whoever this represents, they are causing war on the earth. And we know in times of world war, or any kind of war, there is no peace on the earth. Now, I want to remove a common interpretation that comes up. I just kind of want to point it out. A lot of people will point to the taking peace from the earth as something supernatural from God or commanded by God, because only God can remove peace from the earth. Honestly, that's not true, because I mean, when man caused sin, he kind of took away the peace in the earth, but that's a whole other teaching there. However, that kind of teaching assumes that the earth is going to be at peace before this takes place. Now, even when Jesus was on the earth, when he was in his earthly ministry, years, over 2,000 years ago, he said he didn't come to bring peace in the earth, but a sword of division. Like if you look at Matthew 10:34, Luke 12:51. So if Jesus says he didn't come to bring peace on the earth, that means what? There is no peace on the earth in the context of that conversation, right? So it's not like there's some sort of godly peace on the earth right now. There is for his people, but in terms of the world, we don't really have peace on earth. There's people in war all the time. So whatever this person is doing, this horseman, by taking peace on the earth, is just like Jesus says, he's causing wars and rumors of wars. Well, that's enough to rattle anybody, right? If you knew that there's going to be war across town, like a military type of strike kind of thing, you won't really be at peace. You'll be praying about it and so on, but that obviously will take peace from that part of the earth. So if there's more wars across the planet or rumors of war, the world will not be at peace. And again, that's peace from the earth, not peace from believers. It's just let's not read any further into it. The other assumption here that's made sometimes is that in Revelation 6:4, it says God grants the red horse to take peace in the earth. Like God commanded him to do it. The thing is, it's another assumption because it doesn't say who is granting him the ability to do so. It could just as likely be the Antichrist is directing the red horse to cause war, so the Antichrist can remain unrevealed as the Antichrist. All we know is that someone granted him this power to do so, or authority to do so, but it doesn't say who. For anybody to say God must have given him that power, well, no, because God doesn't give, for example, in World War I, and World War II, God didn't grant power for someone to cause the earth. Human beings just did it. So it isn't required for God to give someone power to cause a war that makes people feel like peace isn't around anymore. All right. Now back to Matthew 24. Again, it's a parallel because Jesus adds that there will be wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet, which means there's still more to come. Now, in examining this text, again, do we see the signs of the day of the Lord to come? No, not yet. Do we read anywhere that events here were caused by God or commanded by God, black and white? No. Someone can interpret it that way, but that's adding something that's not written. So let me not make an assumption that God did or didn't do it here. It isn't written, so I'm going to continue with the black and white. So therefore, the day of the Lord has not yet begun because we still haven't seen those celestial signs. Okay, next one. All right, so again, here we see our next addition to the visual of the chart. We're seeing, again, events still happening to the left of the midpoint because we haven't seen the abomination of desolation announced yet. All right, continue Revelation 6. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked and behold a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." Now, Matthew 24, it says, For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. Okay, so we have another direct parallel here. Because of the time of war that I just, any time of war really, there's famines that happen. Things get more expensive, right? Well, there's a large war, things get really expensive. I mean, in the example here, it talks about a quarter of wheat for a denarius. Denarius, at least at the time of this writing, was the equivalent of a normal person's daily wages. So it's like working an 8-hour day, and that's just enough to buy yourself a loaf of bread. That's really expensive. Now, again, an interpretation, I'm going to call it interpretation on my part, and again, many also believe the same thing, is that this type of war makes it easier for the Antichrist to take control of agriculture, or perhaps targeting agricultural areas to make it easier to control people. I would agree that this strategy would make it easier for global control of the population, as most people probably would. It makes sense. You cause a war, you cause a famine, and if you come up as this leader trying to help out, people are going to come to you for leadership. It makes it easy because people are in need. All right, so examining the text, do we see the signs for the day of the Lord to come? No, they're not here. Do we read anywhere that the events here were caused by God or commanded by God? No, nothing yet. All right, so here we see our next edition. Again, this is all happening before the abomination of desolation because it hasn't been mentioned yet. So we just know that this is happening to the left side of the middle. All right. Okay, continue Revelation 6. It says, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, come. I looked and behold an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. In Matthew 24 it says, then they will deliver you to tribulation, and they will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time many will fall away, and many will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. All right, so now we see the true tribulation begin. However, this is not the great tribulation you may have heard about. That comes later. Now, even during this period of persecution, many will be killed. Revelation 6 shows that a fourth of the earth will be killed. No, now this can be a fourth of the geography of the earth or a fourth of the population. It isn't specific. Either way, lots of killing for sure. Lots of persecution, just like Jesus said. Now in Matthew 24, Jesus describes tribulation and killing. He tells the disciples, as what generally we accept as a church representation, that you will have tribulation, death, and hatred. As a result, many will fall away. This kind of looks very similar to what 1 Timothy 4:1 says, where the Spirit told Paul that in the last days, many will fall away from the faith. Jesus further explains that there will be more false prophets, betrayal, and sin will increase and love will grow cold. Similar to Revelation 2 and 3, Jesus calls for endurance until the end to be saved here. He further adds that during this time period, the gospel will be preached to all nations. Now, one thing that's really interesting here is that this period is when the gospel reaches the ends of the earth. You may have heard many claim that Jesus won't return until the gospel is preached everywhere. You may or may not believe that, but you may have heard that. Now, I agree, such people were absolutely right. Because at this point, Jesus has not yet returned. And this is the point where the gospel is preached to the ends of the earth. Now, if you are one of those that believe Jesus won't return until the gospel reaches the ends of the earth, then what Jesus is describing are events that will take place before he returns to the church. Now, let's examine the text. Do we see the signs of the day of the Lord to come? No, not yet. Do we read anywhere that the events here were caused by God or commanded by God? No, not yet. All right, so let's look at the timeline, but I added something at the top. All right, so in the bottom, you'll see the fourth section, the fourth of the earth killed, right? And the two scriptures there. But I want to point you to something that Paul wrote in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 4. And he wrote, Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, regarding the coming of our Lord Christ and our gathering to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed by a spirit or a message or a letter as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord is come. No one is to deceive you in any way, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. All right, so why am I mentioning this passage? Well, according to Paul, our gathering, the day of the Lord, right, see the bold and red, it can't come until after the apostasy and the revelation of the man of lawlessness. Well, here, in Matthew 24, Jesus said that many are going to fall away, people will betray each other, etc. That spells out for us the apostasy that Paul was talking about. Consider this would make sense because in order to avoid persecution, many will do whatever it takes to not be killed or even be persecuted. Again, that's the point of persecution. The enemy is trying to use that as a way to get you to deny the faith out of fear. The second main part of what Paul writes is that in addition to the apostasy taking place, the Antichrist, known here as the man of lawlessness, must take his seat in the temple as well before the day of the Lord can come. We haven't seen that part yet, but we did just see the apostasy take place, so we're getting closer for sure to the return of Christ. We're not there yet, but we're definitely getting closer. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for today, and we'll continue to the part 2 of Revelation chapter 6. Again, as always, any questions or comments, put them in there. If there's something you don't agree with, let me know in the comments. If you agree, let me know. If you're just uncertain about something, again, feel free to comment, let me know. I'm trying to answer it as best as possible to all the questions that have come so far. So I'll continue to try and do that. With that said, God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.